Welcome back to the ECB Cyber Bar. Today we're pouring a strong one. Not whiskey, but wisdom. We're joined by Mr. Q here, and we're talking policy and what that means to you, our audience. We're discussing Zimbabwe's own Data Protection Act, what it means, not the intricacies, but the implications at boardroom level, pretty much, which is our audience here. Cybersecurity is not just an IT problem, it's actually become a boardroom problem because the boardroom is actually accountable. And to help us break it down tonight, Mr. Q, maybe you can start by introducing yourself.
Thank you, Munya. Thank you for that introduction. My name is Ndubani Hlomula, otherwise known as Q. I have a background firstly in advertising as a copywriter and a creative, then in film production, then in business administration, then in telco for 6 years, and then in cybersecurity. So I kind of have one of those CVs that go everywhere because I'm a curious heart, and every time something perks my curiosity, I'm like a dog with a bone. I don't let go until I master it.
Thank you, Mr. Q. So much depth in that. You are well traveled, it seems. But yeah, thank you for having us. So yes, let's break it down. The law, right? As it stands, what has changed and why does it matter now?
Great question. I think a bit of context is beautiful in this instance. You know, the anecdote is usually that public sector always follows private sector in terms of innovation and thought leadership. And so what you've had is a history of private entities being ahead of government and complaining. But right now in Zimbabwe, we have the government being steps ahead of private sector. In fact, business is fallen so far behind that right now they're doing tickbox exercises to keep up with what the government has done for us to have a law and a framework within which we can operate and address cyberspace. So what's changed? Well, in 2022, the Cyber and Data Protection Act was introduced. But it did not grow any teeth until sometime in 2024, September, I believe, when it was promulgated. And then it was mandatory for us to, as businesses, to live according to the act and to live up to the act, rather. And who does this act apply to? It applies to any entity that holds the data of 50 or more individuals. That's going to be a lot of businesses out there. Now, if you think about data, before data just used to be an ancillary object in business, but now it is the core of most businesses. I'll give you an example. I mentioned that I was in telco for 6 years. I worked for Vodafone, placed at Vodacom, and we had an offering. This offering was a vouchering methodology that gave deals to the public. And the way this worked was a nice triangle. We had the audience over here because they sat with Vodacom, which is the biggest telco in South Africa. And then on the other end, we had the merchants. And then on this end, we had ourselves, the telco. We gave the merchant customers through the audience. The audience got free deals through the merchants, and we got data. Now, in this picture, it could have looked like these two were benefiting with us out of the loop, but we actually benefited the most because we're able to build a strong data profile of our audience out there, behavioral analytics, and so much more that we managed to gain. I mean, I don't want to go into stuff that I signed an NDA for, but the data points that sit with your telcos are matched and perhaps surpassed only by your banks. So the financial sector and telcos are the two spaces where data is truly appreciated for what it's worth. Now, when you sit with 50 or more people's data, that makes you either an SME and all the way through to an enterprise. So you could be a university, you could be a financial institution, a bank, a pension fund, an insurance company, private businesses, government. Everyone is now supposed to live according to the Act. And they are now considered data controllers. And the moment you become a data controller, you must appoint a data protection officer.
Wow. Okay. Right. So you said 50 plus people. So if I'm an SME and I'm capturing data in a logbook
Right.
or on a ledger,
Right.
right? Nothing digitized, nothing automated, right? Does that same law apply to me, or this is digital data?
This law is ubiquitous. It
Mhm.
applies to everyone. So you could be a little 5-man organization, but dealing with 50 clients. That means that you have 50 data points, 50 individuals whose data points you possess. In that instance, you're supposed to
Wow.
register as a data controller. There's no exemption. It could be in cyberspace. It could be soft data. It could be hard data. It could be something that you write in a ledger. You're supposed to be a data controller.
Wow. Okay, so in that instance, what do I get from the regulator? In this case, that's POTRAZ, right?
Yeah.
What do they give me, and what do I need to do, right? What's the criteria to be compliant?
Okay, so to be compliant as a data controller, you must register with POTRAZ through a form called a DP2 form. And when you do that, you will get your license. And then when you get your license as a data controller, you will then appoint a DPO. Now, this DPO is not just anyone that you just throw in the mix. This individual must be somebody who's qualified, certified, and notably acknowledged by POTRAZ itself. Now, qualification can be done through Harare's Institute of Technology's program if they don't have any pre-qualification prior. And they must operate independently, by the way. Your DPO must not be someone who perhaps is in charge of your database, because that's the database they're supposed to be monitoring, and that becomes a conflict of interest. It's a cyclical scenario where you have someone in charge of data going on and becoming a data protection officer.
Wow.
So think of it this way: the Data Protection Act is like a loaded gun, and the date is already passed. You're supposed to pull the trigger now. It's been 2 years since 2024's promulgation. Anyone who is not registered as a data controller and has over 50 customers is in breach of a pre-existing law. You're literally breaking the law.
So it sounds like everyone in enterprise right now is in complete violation of this act, right? We're way past deadline, according to what you said. So you've mentioned what it takes to be compliant, the boxes that need to be ticked. But I also think that the mindset also needs to shift. If you talk to anyone who's in enterprise, maybe in the SME space, even in large corporate space, right? If we talk DPO and compliance with this, right? They're like, computers, you guys on computers, right? But their whole systems, the whole operations, the whole model of their business is run pretty much entirely on computers, right? And operating systems, whether in manufacturing, engineering, biotech, etc. Right. So, wow, it's quite interesting. It's scary though. But yeah, let's see how POTRAZ goes in terms of nudging and pushing people to be compliant. What are the penalties?
I guess before we go to the penalties, you mentioned something that's very interesting there to say, then, what does that require of the entity itself? And I want to say, let's go into a little bit more in the weeds what our data protection officer must look like. This can't be someone that you appoint arbitrarily on a Friday afternoon and you say, okay, listen, you're the IT administrator. Now you're in charge of, you're the DPO. It can't be someone like that. The role requires a formal qualification, and that qualification has that Harare Institute of Technology certification. So you must have the HIT certification. It's mandatory, not optional. And then secondly, that DPO must have sufficient authority within the organization. This is very important for the C-suite to understand. If you have someone who then cannot enforce data protection practices, they really are just there for cosmetics. You want somebody who's going to be able to report perhaps to the CEO or it could be as long as it's not to the chief risk officer, as long as it's not to somebody that would be aligned in the data space. So it can't be to the CISO or CIO or someone in IT. It has to be someone who is going to be looking at the organizational risk, because that is what is being catered to by the Act itself.
Yeah, that's very interesting. That's very interesting. Yeah. Good times ahead. Times ahead. Looks like it. Yeah. So penalties. I heard they're quite stiff. Someone whispered imprisonment. What are we looking at here?
You're touching a hot potato there. When you're talking in terms of just the direct consequences of being in breach of that law, you're looking at about $5,000 in fines and up to 7 years in jail, or both. And the liability sits with the C-suite. So you're looking right there at the CEO level, the CRO level. Someone is going to answer to the effect of $5,000 and 7 years of your life.
Okay, so it's not just the company being fined. It's
personal liability.
It's personal liability.
That's it.
Up to CEO level.
And look, that's for the responsible individual. And in this instance, it would be the CEO if he hasn't structured his organization correctly. And then, look, these are not theoretical maxims. They are laws. They are written, they're enforceable, and the capacity is growing for POTRAZ to enforce those regulatory frameworks. So, and they also have been doing a lot more inspections. So they know someone who is doing this as a tick box exercise. And therefore, they can identify that you're just doing it just to make sure that you get away with it. Now, directors and officers can be held personally liable. And so, therefore, they also, as a board, must sit on the CEO's neck, put pressure, so that the CEO gets his act together and gets his DPO in place.
So I guess now the executives are paying attention. Yeah, there's a lot of detail to this. What does it mean for us? Yeah. So anyway, beyond the legal penalties, what are the implications?
Look, there's going to be a greater fallout than the consequences. The consequences, the legal consequences, are more of what punishments you're going to get for not behaving.
Yeah.
But think about it. As an organization, you get a breach. The average cost of a breach right now sits at about $5.71 million. That's a lot of money. We're talking what it costs, not just for you to have been, maybe to have paid the ransom if it's a ransomware attack, but also the investigation costs and the recovery costs. And, there's so much more. There's the public cost, because if you are sitting with the data of somebody and it gets compromised and they personally then are exposed, then you have a bigger problem. I'll give you a classic example. I don't know if any of you know of the Ashley Madison breach.
Yep.
That actually released names of the people that were on that site.
Yeah.
Now, I am not a moral authority to say who should be on that site or not, but one thing for sure, it affected a lot of marriages when people were found out to have been on Ashley Madison. For those who don't know, Ashley Madison was a league. Can you call it legal? It was a web page where those looking for discrete relationships, but they were in the confines of marriage and decided to go out the bounds of that, which we really discourage, because that's really an immoral act. They would do that on Ashley Madison. And someone perhaps decided they were Robin Hood and they were going to do good, do bad to do good, and decided to expose all the names that were on Ashley Madison. A lot of marriages fell apart. A lot of social compromise happened. That's an extreme example. That's an outlier because of the purposes of the site.
Yeah.
But can you imagine what else has happened out there because of a breach? So the consequences of a data breach are a lot. And that's why I guess we come back to, what does our DPO look like? This has got to be somebody who's got authority, because they've got to be able to enforce data practices. So they've got to be embedded in the organization, present and accessible, and known to staff. And they have to have a direct reporting line to the CEO or the board. They mustn't be buried in the IT department. They must conduct regular internal audits. There must be somebody who has a direct reporting line to the CEO or the board. Because if they sit somewhere and they answer to somebody whose work that they must monitor, then we have a bit of a problem again structurally. And this must be someone who has the authority to conduct regular audits and staff training and data mapping exercises for the organization. Now, they must also be involved in new product development because products are going to come that manage and deal with the data of the organization. Therefore, they must have that kind of authority. Otherwise, you are giving a child the burden of lifting the heaviest load in the house. And you don't want that. You want the parent to be the one that deals with the issues in the home. So there must be a parent to some extent. So again, on the operational reality of a breach, a ransomware attack on a Zimbabwean financial institution does not just affect the data, it shuts down operations. We are not speaking of global entities here, we're speaking of parochial entities in a small country. Average recovery time from a ransomware incident for an organization without a listed incident response plan is 22 days. 22 days to recover from a breach. That is a nightmare. The average cost, 5 million. Cyber attacks are no longer someone in a hood with a Guy Fawkes mask typing away, trying to hack away at your firewall. They are as simple as could be country attacks, or it could be just someone who decides commercially they want to sabotage you, or it could be the criminal element, somebody who decides that they're going to siphon your funds from you. And so they might not be an experienced hacker, but now hacks are done as franchise models where somebody buys the instructions of how to deploy the hack for as little as $5,000. And then they prejudice your organization for $5 million. And in Zim's financial and services sector, a breach makes headlines. Customers move their business. Partners reconsider contracts. The reputational damage outlasts the technological recovery.
Okay, this sounds very technical, cumbersome, and it requires a lot of resources in terms of the human resource, the certification, and for a person to be that qualified, it means they're quite pricey on your wage bill, right? And that then speaks to, are there enough DPOs going around to service the current market, right? So is there a way that DPO can be provided as a service, a managed service? Or maybe you can just start by explaining what that is.
Well, you've already given the answer. Yes, in some instances, you might have to give a managed service. But I think let's pull back just a little bit and firstly acknowledge that the attitude towards cybersecurity has got to change. It's not just another cost line item on the budget that we must begrudgingly face. It is actually an integral part of business. Once we have that attitude towards it, then even when we look at developing our business, we're never going to look at it as, oh, then I've also got the burden of cybersecurity. Every business goes about and says, I need a chief marketing officer, even at the beginning. We need to reach market. But most of our business is held on digital platforms. We should be thinking, what am I doing in order to protect my digital estate? This is a very core function of a business. Once we are thinking that way, then we're not just thinking of, oh, this is a cost item, and we can look at it creatively. Perhaps, as you mentioned, a managed service. So if I'm still too small as a business, I could look at what entities could provide me the same services as a DPO. That would be integrated into my organization. This cannot be an ancillary matrix organization that I keep on the outside. They must be integrated. So what does that good leadership look like? Firstly, there's a positive tone at the top about cybersecurity. So the CEO sets the culture for the organization. They set the culture. If they ask about cybersecurity in every board meeting, the attitude is going to change. But if it's an incidental thing that they look at, then it's going to be a burden to everyone. If the CEO treats it as a nuisance, then every manager below them reads the signal and acts accordingly. What you want is for the CEO to always give us budget shifts, conversation, and the behavioral change will follow. The board must also receive a regular cyber risk report, because only when they see this in their face regularly are they going to realize this is not an IT department problem? It's not the Y2K problem that, oh, the IT guys were going to deal with. This is a universal problem in any organization, or rather a universal matter to be addressed in the organization. Secondly, you cannot protect what you do not know you have. This sounds obvious, but I'll tell you, most organizations genuinely cannot answer the question, what customer data are you holding? And so we need to know what our estate is. Every C-suite leader should be able to answer one of these four following questions. Where does our customer and employee data live? Is it on the cloud? Is it on-prem? What sort of a server is it? Is it a legacy space? Is it something that's future-proofed? Who has access to it? At what level? And why? They must also be able to answer, what is our data retention policy? How long do we keep it? And what happens to it when we no longer need it? And finally, they must be able to answer, what happens operationally and legally if the data is exposed or stolen? If you cannot answer these questions today, then commissioning a data audit is the first practical step. You might need an assessment. You might need a specialist like ECB to come in and run an assessment in your organization.
Thank you.
The next thing is to integrate cyber risk management into enterprise risk management. These two are not separate. They are one entity. Cyber risk belongs in the enterprise risk register alongside with credit risk, alongside with market risk, liquidity risk, and operational risk, not a separate IT annex. The CISO or the DPO should present at board level, not just to the IT committee. Their audience needs to include the CEO, the CFO, and non-executive directors. Again, the audience needs to include the CEO, the CFO, and non-executive directors. Risk appetite for cyber must be explicitly defined. What level of risk is the board willing to accept, and what controls are non-negotiable? This is not about becoming a technology company. It's about governing in a modern digital age where technology is the core of most businesses. Now, of course, you asked, what does a small organization do? There's the budget reality. We have to consider the budget reality. Cybersecurity is not a cost center. It is a premium on an insurance policy against catastrophic operational and legal losses. But let's not treat it like tickbox insurance. It is critical for us to take that insurance. The question is never how much does it cost. The question is how much will a breach cost us?
Yeah.
And when you look at that, then you have to be willing to then take the route that you can most afford for you to mitigate against any route. If it's a managed service, then you're going to go the managed service route. If it's not a managed service, then you're going to go and develop your own capacity internally. Organizations that invest in prevention consistently recover faster and at lower cost than those that invest in response after the fact.
Yeah, interesting. Very interesting response there. So in essence, myself as an SME or a startup, right? If I'm handling 50 plus profiles, right? I can outsource this, right, to a service provider, right, as a managed service, right. So they run my compliance, and essentially, I can get certification, right, and licensing based on that, right. But then it goes to my next point. If I'm just chasing a piece of paper, which is a license, right? Is that enough, right? If I'm just looking to tick the right boxes, right, so that when POTRAZ calls or when they come knocking at my door, right, they can see my license on the wall. But is my customer data really safe because I've got that license on the wall?
That's it. That is exactly the attitude that we need to take. And that's why there's no excuse for no cyber security plan. There's no excuse at all. And you rightly put it. Do I want to tick the box? yet my customers are exposed, or my partners or my stakeholders? Or do I want to actually be compliant? Compliance is not a very difficult thing. It just seems scary because POTRAZ has decided to enforce it. But it's a practice we should have been doing all along. So no organization needs to navigate the space alone, given we are not all experts, because even at enterprise level, we're trying to learn how to develop this. But what you need is not a consultant who comes in and goes away. They come in, they do their job quarterly, and they walk away. What you need is a partner. And this is where someone like ECB comes into the picture. And I know this sounds like a plug, but this is an organization that I really, really believe in what you're doing. I really like some. The reason I'm on ECB Cyber Cafe is because I really believe in what you're doing at ECB. So a good external support looks like not a consultant with a policy document, but a partner who helps you build your internal capacity. But in the meantime, be compliant and be protected. The managed service that we spoke about. Yeah. ECB's role in the landscape is to help organizations in Zimbabwe to become, and in the region, to move from reactive compliance to proactive protection, right? So I mentioned earlier, but I saw that point, maybe I mentioned it too quickly, so it was kind of lost in words, that it costs by factors of magnitude so much less for organizations that are prepared to recover from a breach than those that are not prepared to react to one. It's like medicine, the best medicine is prevention. Yeah. Prevention beats cure anytime.
True.
Yeah. You'd rather stay healthy than have to be brought back to health. And that's the principle.
So, okay. So, Mr. Q, you're telling me that license on the wall is not going to protect me. I'm not protected. I mean, it's not like insurance where you've got an insurance certificate and you're covered. So in essence, licensing does not mean protection. I actually need someone who's going to tell me
listen,
how I'm covered.
I want to say it like the Zulu say it in South Africa.
Yeah.
Uzoboshwa.
Please
let me say it in Shona.
Yeah.
Musungwa. See, what happens is, POTRAZ is getting better and better at investigating these breaches because they're encountering more and more of them. And they can tell someone who's taken a tick box exercise versus someone who's actually been prepared. And so you will be held liable, even if you have your DPO in place, even if you have your data controller certificate in place. If you were not actually actively protecting that data, you are still liable to that $5,000 or 7 years
in jail.
I don't know what's more important to you. It depends. If $5,000 is more important to you, maybe that's the price of a holiday for a family, or 7 years of your life. That's, if you're going to live to 70, that's 10% of your life that can go away for being careless with people's data.
Yeah, so it looks like the law is telling us to be ready.
Right.
The environment is telling us to be ready. The attackers are telling us to be ready because they're coming, right? And our own clients, right, which is pretty much the biggest stakeholder, right? Because that's the machinery of your business, right? They're trusting you with your data, right? And they're under the assumption that you are protected, you are covered, right? So they're telling you to be ready,
right?
So what can we say? What would be the take home from this, right? If I'm running a C-suite, if I'm at the top of the food chain in a company, what would you tell me today, right?
The first question I would ask: are we registered with POTRAZ? That is our first action of a CEO or CFO. Are we registered with POTRAZ? Secondly, do we have a qualified data protection officer embedded in the organization? Again, I will repeat, embedded in the organization, not just someone out there. And if you can't get a clear answer after 24 hours, then you do have a problem. That's your answer. Action number 2, every board member must put cyber risk on their next board agenda. At every instance, ask about cyber risk. What is our posture? Where do we stand? Not as an IT update, but as a formal business risk conversation. with a risk register, a budget line, and an accountable executive owner, someone who must own the problem. That's the next thing. And the third action, I would say, for every senior manager, commission a data audit. Find out what personal data your organization holds or your department holds, where it lives, whether your current practices meet the SI 155 requirements, because you cannot manage what you cannot map. So therefore, find out where the data sits, what it's doing, and how it's protected. Take those 3 actions, and you've got some remedial activity going on in your organization.
Wow, very insightful. There you have it for yourselves. Products give us the tools, the law gives us the rules, and we pay for the misalignments, should there be any. Thank you so much, Mr. Q. This is I think one of the hardest hitting episodes so far, right? We're talking jail terms now. Like, this is escalating.
And I've made commentary to my wife, who's a compliance officer, so much that she's a prefect at work. But now here I am being a prefect. And this is it. This is it. Truly, look, it is a compliance matter, but in the digital space.
Yeah. So clearly there is a problem, and first step to solving any problem is talking about it, and this is why the ECB Cyber Bar is here. Thank you so much for joining us, Mr. Q, and thank you, our kind audience, and see you next week.